This is the Kalmiopsis Wilderness in southwestern Oregon, and this little speck of white here is Emily Camp, which is the last remaining inholding in the Kalmiopsis Wilderness. And this is why they want to run me out. I'm not going to let them. Back in 1988, when Carl Alleman patented the property, the patent process again was one in which he had to prove that there was enough gold reserves here in order for the prudent man rule to be met. So the Forest Service did a number of tests and examinations, and eventually, after the whole thing was said and done, and many thousands of dollars were spent on surveys and mineral examiners and all that, eventually that patent was granted. But the point being is that it was proven that there was sufficient gold reserves at Emily Camp to meet the Forest Service guidelines. Prudent from the standpoint that there was enough reserves, that there was enough value in those reserves, and that it could be economically extracted. Very important, and that document very clearly points out the fact that all of those stipulations could be met.
For the patent process, for that land to ultimately have arrived in private hands, it had to survive what they call a validity test. The mining claim had to be shown to be valid, and by that it has to show that there are enough mineral values there that a prudent operator can make a reasonable profit.
USGS, United States Geological Survey, come in there and did test, and I believe it was around the 50s or early 60s. They did tests and everything, and they appraised the gold at $150 an ounce for all the gravels on the little Chetco was worth well over $3 million in 3 miles.
1998-99, Carl Alleman was aging, and he wanted to sell the property, and he disclosed that he wanted to get $600,000 for the property. So interesting that the Forest Service then at that time decided not to take the highest and best use of mining, because the price of gold had obviously risen. So they had the property appraised. The Forest Service had the property appraised for its timber value. And interesting that the appraisal came in right at $600,000.
Regarding the appraisal as to whether it was valued for timber or valued for gold, it's really the wrong question. The value of the property is the value of the property. If there's gold values there, they add to the value of the property. If there's timber values there, they add to the value of the property. It's up to the appraisal and the appraisal process to determine the values of each of those elements to come up to the ultimate value. So it's not one versus the other, it's a combination of both. How the appraisal was conducted for either timber or minerals, I can't speak to that, I don't know.
This is a breakdown of the $600,000 offer that was made by the U.S. Forest Service to Carl Alleman. As you can see here, they have it broken down in terms of land, timber, and mineral resources. The value of the vacant land was approximately $200,000, the value of the timber about $350,000, and a value of the mineral resource merely $60,000. How they came up with this $60,000 for the mineral reserves is on this next page where it says highest and best use. The first highest and best use was the timber harvesting value. Then it was recreational mining, not the commercial aspect of mining the property for its gold. Then, of course, private recreation. This recreational mining aspect is quite contrary to the documentation that was already provided and proven by the U.S. Forest Service years before in the mineral patent process. These are the conclusions on page 10 of the mineral exam that says clearly that the property could be mined at a profit as of August 1984.
The Forest Service, not wanting me down there, made me an offer of $600,000 for the property. And I hadn't accepted it because they said they didn't know when they could pay it. So I wasn't going to sign anything if I didn't know when I was going to get the money.
The Forest Service was working to purchase the property from Mr. Alleman. It had gotten so far along that we'd actually had the agreements. The Forest Service essentially had the money in hand and were ready to make the exchange of money for land when the Biscuit Fire occurred.
The Biscuit Fire, when it started, they could have put it out with 30 men. They says, oh, well, wait, it's just a lightning fire. It ain't going to go nowhere. And 3 days later, there's already 1,000 acres or more. And they could have even put it out then, but they says, well, we'll just let it burn.
Well, then when that biscuit fire came through, they were setting backfires all over, and the helicopter pilot told me that the Emily claims didn't burn. They said because it was in a deep canyon, and fire don't go downhill very fast, you know. And but he said then I was ordered to drop incendiaries on that canyon and burn the canyon out because they didn't want me in there.
I saw pictures that a Forest Service guy had was taken after the fire went through. Emily cabin was green, and then when I went down there, it was scorched earth. Those fires were so hot, whatever chemical they used melted the porcelain off the sinks.
In suppressing the biscuit fire, there were a number of cases where the Forest Service firefighters had to start backfires to contain that fire. Lots of acres were burned in those backfires that were ultimately effective in saving the town of Cave Junction. A number of people have claimed that their property was destroyed by these backfires. And in a number of cases, those folks have ascribed intent to the Forest Service of intentionally burning this area because my property was there. From my experience with the Forest Service, the only intent the Forest Service ever has in starting backfires is to stop that fire and to save communities from destruction. The Forest Service has no interest, nothing to gain by burning any private property either on or adjacent to national forest.
This is a breakdown of the appraisal that was done by the U.S. Forest Service after the biscuit fire. It shows here that their valuation came to approximately $160,000. The breakdown goes as follows. The vacant land value without the timber or mineral resources is about $100,000. The timber value went to zero, and this is the same $60,000 for the gold reserves that was valued as recreational interests, as we've seen previously. It's particularly interesting that this $101,520 is exactly half as much as the original valuation was prior to the biscuit fire, just about 1 year prior, as we saw in this document here, where the Forest Service appraised the value of the land only at $203,040. And this is in a time in which the land values were appreciating quite quickly during a land boom in the early 2000 timeframe.